Hey there, this is Cam Shea, and with me is IGN's racing expert Luke Riley.
That's what he calls me.
That's what I call you. And I also call you our racy expert because of some of the revealing outfits you wear around the office.
Yes.
But that's neither here nor there. We've made you dress up today, wear some proper respectable clothes.
Yeah.
We're talking about the top 10 most influential racing games of all time.
Of all time, that is correct. Not the best racing games necessarily.
Yep.
Some of them were incredible at the time. Mm-hmm. So spare me any hate about where's Need for Speed Underground?
Get out of the comments thread right now. We're not interested in what you have to say unless you're going to listen to his explanation.
But yeah, these are 10 games, 11 actually.
That cheeky.
Have
wait.
Fundamentally
11 because you made room for Mashed?
No.
Oh, okay. Doesn't matter. Move on.
Well, no. Fundamentally defined what we expect from racing games, what we have expected from racing games, the very mechanics of the racing games we've been playing for several decades. When you think about racing games, they are one of the longest lasting and sort of steadfast genres of video games. Like today, everyone's about first-person shooters and MMOs and that kind of stuff. Totally fine. But racing games, they date back to the very early 80s. It's a type of game that's been around and changed slightly, but been around for a long time.
Yeah, and racing games can be historically have been the kind of technical showcases to show what's possible with new hardware.
Yeah.
And they've broken kind of new ground in other areas like open worlds and online and a bunch of different things. So racing games kind of they kind of lead the charge in a lot of ways with the evolution of kind of game design.
Very much. And these 10, 11 games reflect all of those things Cam was just saying then. So let's get stuck into the first honourable mention.
Okay, so
which
get that out of the way.
Was part of the top 10, and then I kind of shifted it, partially because there was something I really wanted to squeeze in, and partially because it's not strictly a racing game.
Right.
And my honourable mention is Driver,
at
number 11.
You're going to say that.
Which is more of an action driving game. It's not strictly a racing game, but it is definitely the pioneer of 3D open world driving.
For sure.
It was a stunning game when it released. It's pretty terrible looking now.
Yeah. As a lot of those PlayStation 1, 3D, early 3D games.
But
to be
absolutely fair, it paved the way for things like Midnight Club, which itself was a pioneer of open world racing in open cities with no tracks, and so on and so forth.
And it was just embodying that kind of car chase spirit that we've all kind of grown up kind of loving in action films and there's some of these iconic kind of car films. So
I had to give credit where credit was due there. Number 10 is a game that I don't know whether you'd be ever familiar with. Even I wasn't really familiar with it at the time.
By the way, we're very much the original odd couple when it comes to racing games. We've got simulation guy, likes things to feel relatively realistic, and pure arcade, wannabe power sliding around every corner guy.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm going to contribute to this conversation. Sorry, Luke, go ahead.
Indianapolis 500 Simulation. This was a game that was released.
You lost me at simulation.
In the very early 90s, kind of maybe not the first simulation. There was a game that was released in the early 80s called Revs, which a lot of people regard as the first simulation racing game. This game, Indianapolis 500, it had one oval track, just one race, but it was you could change the wing settings, the tire pressure, you could race the entire length of the Indianapolis 500, which is 200 laps, on a game that looked like Lego. And if you,
but it was like a first person.
It was first person, yeah. But if you crashed on the 199th lap, it was all over.
Oh dear.
Yeah. It was all over. That was it. But
so
this
it has everything I dislike about simulation.
Yeah, pretty much. This game, though, just before we move on, it really did trigger the sort of 90s simulation war when you started to see all those F1 games coming out. These guys went on to make the Grand Prix Legends game, which is a cult, super cult, favorite simulation, even to this day. Number 9 is the game I kicked Driver out of the top 10 to squeeze in, because the more I thought about it, the more I decided this really laid the foundations for tuning and customization. And this game is Street Rod, released in 1989.
Ah, yeah.
And the more I thought about it, the more ahead of its time this game seemed to be. And I've been playing it over the course of writing this feature. And you got to buy the parts. You have to manually install the parts. That's something that games have lost now. You manually adjust the bolts and connect the wires and all that kind of stuff. But it was a game that you needed to juggle the economy. You needed to go out and race against people at the burger joint, build up cash slowly, or win their cars via races for pink slips, and then go to the classifieds, buy new gearboxes, buy new engines, fit them. And this really
sounds very involved.
It was, and it kind of still is. And it really, when you think about it, laid a blueprint that a lot of games have followed since, particularly Need for Speed games. When you think about all the modding that not so much these days, but for a time with the Underground series, and that was a huge focus. And Gran Turismo and Forza, and this is a game that you could change the color of your car. You could put stickers on the door, and it was just all 2D and sprites and that kind of stuff. But it was, I think, a really influential game in a lot of ways, and a lot of people have forgotten about it.
We should probably do a Let's Play of that as well.
We could do that. Number 8 is F-Zero.
Sweet. Yeah.
Which I knew you'd be familiar with.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Not so much me, because I didn't grow up, I wasn't weaned on Nintendo, I was more of a PC guy, but credit where credit is deserved, F-Zero really did pioneer the futuristic racing genre. Which has kind of vanished these days.
Well, it still exists.
How many years since Wipeout?
Yeah, it still exists to some extent on mobile devices and stuff, but they're kind of Wipeout clones. It is time for that genre to come back, because F-Zero as a series, F-Zero X was amazing. It was quite rudimentary kind of 3D graphics, but 60 frames a second, super fast. And then F-Zero GX was just incredible, these huge fields of cars that you're racing against. And those games had all those kind of tube kind of courses and stuff, and really went to town on the kind of environments you're on. This twisting, roller coaster, corkscrew kind of courses. The F-Zero series wasn't just it was influential for games like Wipeout and
Extreme G
and all those games. But then in its own right, kind of went on to do some really cool stuff as well.
Yeah, definitely.
But for me, one of my favorite racing experiences of all time are the Wipeout games.
Yeah, right.
We wouldn't necessarily have them if it wasn't for F-Zero. So definitely influential.
Yeah, extremely influential. Number 7. Another one that I don't know whether you'd be familiar with or not. It is Test Drive 2: The Duel. This is another 1989 game, so it's released same year as Street Rod. Kind of shared a few things in common with it, because in Street Rod you could get chased by the cops. Same for Test Drive. This is the follow-up to the original Test Drive. The games were kind of built on the same architecture, and they were really similar. The difference between the first and the second was the fact that the second introduced an opponent. So you'd choose an opponent, you choose your own car, and you choose some scenery to race through.
Right.
And that was basically it. There wasn't a lot to it, but there wasn't a lot to a lot of games in those days. The thing about Test Drive 2, and I think the reason why it's so influential, is that it really did, kind of carve a path for games like Need for Speed to follow, where a lot of games in the late 80s, and I'm not ignoring Outrun, but a lot of games in the late 80s were all about open wheel cars and Formula 1 cars and all that kind of stuff. That's what people, I guess, who were making these racing games thought racing games had to be.
Right.
Test Drive bucked that trend, and it used real cars. There was Porsches in there, there was Ferraris, there was the Lamborghinis. There were real supercars at the time, very old now, but at the time they were the cutting edge supercars that you had on posters in your bedroom.
Sure.
If you were like me and a gigantic car nerd. And that also the fact that the guys who made that game, Distinctive, were actually bought by EA after that, turned into EA Canada, and then made the Need for Speed.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
wow.
So that's actually, that's probably the more important factor here. Yeah, Test Drive 2, actually a really influential game. I think it really gave people the appetite for the kinds of games that they play now. So you look at Drive Club today, right? It's all about sexy cars, cutting edge cars, and that's what they've sort of targeted. The absolute cutting edge, desirable supercars that you see on Top Gear that you'd never be able to afford in a billion years. Down scenic locations. And these scenic locations in Test Drive are just blocks of pixel vomit.
Right.
You know, like they look awful today. But back then, it was incredible.
So there was no like kind of like race across the country or...
Well, it kind of was, but it was...
There was like self-contained kind of races against your rival.
Against the rival, yeah, to a gas station in several miles down the road. But actually, before we move on, one of the other things about Test Drive is that it introduced expansion packs. So you have these expansion discs of extra cars and extra scenery packs, which now is just a given. You know, you get something like Forza or Drive Club, and you go, oh, there's a new batch of cars or a new environment or track or something like that. You go, yep, sure.
So these guys kind of pioneered actually going to the car manufacturers and licensing these like very desirable.
They were definitely one of the first. Like I mean, Sega had the relationship with Ferrari. This predates Test Drive, of course, but yeah, they were definitely one of the first, and I think they really set a map for something like Test Drive to follow. I mean, it's for Need for Speed.
Yeah, it sounds like the exact blueprint.
Exactly, yeah, all about supercars and that kind of stuff. Number 6, let's quickly move on to Daytona USA.
Sweet.
Which is an arcade juggernaut.
Yep.
Which, how much do you need to say about Daytona USA?
Oh yeah, really, I mean, it's just glorious, like arcade perfection. I mean, that kind of era just had so many great. I mean, the first time I saw like Virtua Racing, I was really blown away. It's a little bit the same with like other early 3D games like Virtua Fighter. Like you see the first iteration of the 3D polygonal kind of version of a genre, and you're really amazed. But then Sega, for the most part, like takes that next step and just absolutely nails it. They up the detail and they hone in on like what makes it fun. And Daytona did that, you know, like it was that manual transmission, power sliding around corners. Simple, but just, you know, so much depth there.
And support for up to like 8 cabinets when you link them all up.
Yeah, for me, like that era, like is Ridge Racer, Sega Rally, Daytona. You know, they're all just, I've got such fond memories of those games because they were quite simple, but they were like kind of razor focused on what they could do well. And yeah, they were just so much fun.
I think particularly when you look at Daytona, and I left. Ridge Racer I've left off this list on account of Daytona being, I think, maybe just the game that did it slightly better.
Yep.
I think Ridge Racer had the better home ports.
Right.
I think Daytona.
Yeah, Daytona was a bit.
But I think when you look at it today, you go into a bowling alley today, and Daytona is still a machine that you walk into a bowling alley and see pride of place.
Yeah.
And I think you just can't ignore that kind of legacy. And yeah, you're right. It was the first game to it added the textures to all the.
It's tricky though, but I think you're right in choosing Daytona or Ridge Racer, one of those real icons as the influencer, as opposed to Virtua Racing, which was obviously kind of set the benchmark in some ways, but like ultimately was less meaningful. And also it wasn't as arcade.
That's a shame because I'm about to.
I should have looked at this list before we started.
No, you shouldn't have.
I've been like avoiding looking at this image back here. I don't know what's on there.
Don't look at that.
I can only assume
it ruins everything.
Yeah.
Number 5.
Can only assume it's Uni Rally. It's mostly just Uni Rally. Am I right?
Yeah. Okay. Number 5 through 1 is Uni Rally. Number 5, Super Mario Kart.
Awesome.
Original Super Mario Kart, which again, just like F-Zero, it basically created an entire genre. On its own,
it's like Doom is to first-person shooters.
Exactly. Like or Wolfenstein 3D.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. I mean, lots of people are Doom fans. I'm a Wolf fan. It's one or the other.
No. I mean, Wolf is the one.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I just for me, it's Doom.
Yeah. Good point. Super Mario Kart. I think, regardless of whether or not, and to be absolutely honest, there are kart races that I actually prefer. But that's just personal preference. Like Crash Team Racing. Or Muppets
by the way, Muppets
Race Mania.
Luke's got questionable judgment when it comes to kart racing games.
But regardless of that, there is no argument that Super Mario Kart really
not just in terms of kind of its influence on just creating that kind of genre as a whole, but also just the way they've evolved it over the years.
Yeah.
Like some of my most treasured kind of gaming memories are Mario Kart DS in the office. We've got like 6 people with a copy of the game and a DS and just hanging out every day playing these sessions of it. Same with Mario Kart 7 actually.
Yeah.
Of course, like Mario Kart 64, since you had 4 players, like just in terms of kind of hanging out with friends, multiplayer gaming, Mario Kart is just right at the core of that for me.
I think there probably aren't. I mean, there probably are a few that I can't think of off the top of my head, but there probably aren't that many games that cemented a formula back in 1992.
Yep.
And that you can make a game today which deviates very little from that.
Yep.
And is still as playable as ever.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't mind if they deviated a little bit more. But, but yeah, it's been very enduring. Like, it's a very strong game design. And again, it's like, the foundation is power sliding, man.
Yeah.
The foundation, like, power sliding as a foundation to build the mechanics and the course design of a game around, just, you know, it works so well.
Yeah. All right, for Outrun.
Yep.
Which we touched on before. Outrun is kind of it's the classic race against the clock experience. It's like Test Drive and several years before Test Drive, didn't have a Formula One car. It had Ferrari. It had exotic locations.
Right.
It was a very different racing game at the time, and I think that's what made it so successful. But that's also what made it so influential down the track.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people have tried to capture that spirit of open road driving in a sexy car, and I think you look at anything today. You look at Forza. You say pull out Forza Horizon, say, right, or Forza Horizon 2, right, and you get in a Ferrari Testarossa and you carve down the seaside. That the DNA of Outrun is still present there. You know, regardless of the fact that now it's an open world game and there's so much more nuance to it. Yes, but I think that Outrun DNA lives on and probably will remain a part of racing games for as long as they are around.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, super important game. And honestly, like the cabinet itself, they weren't first people to strap a steering wheel to a racing game cabinet, but it had that cabinet where you sat in it, and it was just that kind of. I mean, following that, I mean, they brought out like the Afterburner and all that kind of stuff. So I think Outrun, super influential game. Probably not just amongst racing games, but amongst a lot of the arcade games that followed.
Yep. No, like a lot of those games just set this kind of tone for what an arcade experience is.
Yeah.
You know,
totally.
It's flashy and it's bright and it's sexy and cool. And Outrun was one of the first to really kind of nail that, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Three, which is what the game that Cam thought probably wouldn't appear anymore, is Virtua Racing, which wasn't the first 3D game with polygonal graphics.
Right.
That was actually Winning Run, which actually predated it by a couple of years.
Okay. Was that an arcade?
Yeah, it was an arcade game.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
it was a Namco game actually, and there was also
Winning Run.
Yeah, Winning Run. And there was
Seems like an odd name for a racing game.
And Hard Driving, which was Atari's game, was also predated Virtua Racing. Right. And there was some home release games that even predated. It was like Stunts and that kind of stuff. Yeah. All before Virtua Race. But when you look at Virtua Racing, sorry.
I think it was certainly the first 3D racing game the vast majority of people experienced.
Exactly. So,
definitely the first I ever saw, and it really blew my mind at the time.
Yeah. So I think that's where it's.
But not to dump on it too much, but like I just kind of feel like as soon as that next wave of games came out, it was just forgotten.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
But it is still hugely influential because it set the industry up to do that.
Yeah.
So I'm with you, Luke.
Number 2, Gran Turismo, the original Gran Turismo.
Yep.
Which is kind of a given. You probably all saw it coming.
I figured that'd be 1 or 2.
But yeah, I mean, back in the late 90s, racing simulators, which we already discussed what it feels like 2 hours ago, were engaged in a real tit-for-tat on PC. But consoles weren't the place that you went to find a racing simulator. The Touring Cars, which was released in 1997, which was a PC and a PlayStation game, that was a rare thing.
Yeah.
Like, that was a rare treat. That, oh, look at this, it's a cool racing sim and it's on my PlayStation. Predates GT by a few months, I guess. But Gran Turismo just changed the rules of the game, I feel. Like, when you look at the kinds of games that it came out just after, one example that I've used here is that you look at the Need for Speed 2, which was released in 97, that had 9 cars in it. Gran Turismo, the original Gran Turismo, which was released in December 97 in Japan, and then a few months later around the rest of the world, so in 98, had 140 cars that you could modify them, and you could apply racing modifications and paint. You know, there's racing paint jobs, and like 11 like different tracks. And I think the original, I've always thought Gran Turismo's like original tracks are the best. I love real world tracks, and I love that they use real world tracks. But I just There's something about those tracks that are special. But yeah, Gran Turismo, I think it can't be understated how drastic a shift this was in racing. And it's kind of it's one of the reasons why I look at Gran Turismo today and I'm just like, oh, you got to step it up a little bit with the sound and a few other things. Because they were just they were so far, they were embarrassingly far ahead of everyone else at the time. It was just insane. And yeah, they really have, they basically just laid it out and said, this is what you have to do from now on. And that's what people had to start doing from now on. So we wouldn't have Forza without GT. It just wouldn't be the same. We wouldn't have. No, another thing, no one knew that market existed. Even Kazunori himself thought he was working on. He was like, "Oh, this is going to be a niche game, just going to be a niche game," because he followed the Motortoon games. He was like, oh, "I'm working on this game full of Japanese cars, racing cars." And this is going to be a niche game.
That sounds so crazy in retrospect.
And it went on to literally be the best-selling original PlayStation game.
It's a car for motorsports enthusiasts. Like it's got so much to offer. I mean, like even for somebody like me,
I guess they just didn't know the market was there.
Yeah, I mean, I was like largely just an arcade racing guy, but I played like the first few Gran Turismo games like quite extensively. Even though it wasn't like I didn't know the cars, didn't really care about it. It just felt like this mature new entry. It just kind of felt like something really special to me. Like it had just set at the bar really high, and it was just something that I wanted to experience, even though it wasn't a culture that I was necessarily into.
I think it was special. I think it was.
It kind of cuts across. Cuts across audiences really, really successfully. That game.
Definitely. Number one is quite an old game, but I think when you look at it, I think this is one of the most important racing games ever made, and it's Pole Position from Namco, which wasn't the first game that had that third-person chase cam. But the game that preceded it, which was Turbo by Sega, I don't think anyone liked it much. So that
would have been a slightly odd choice as number one.
Yeah, a little
Turbo!
bit. But Pole Position, first game to have a real track, Fuji in Japan. Not that you can tell now when you look at it. You look at the map screen and you're like, oh yeah, that's Fuji. And you play it and you're like, oh, there's a dotted line down the middle of the road. Like it's a, I don't know, like it's a street with Marlboro signs down the.
I guess that's purely just so that you kind of have a better sense of where you are on the road.
Because the opponents are either one on one side or the
other.
I
see.
Generally,
Gotcha. So what year was pole position?
1983.
Wow.
Which is as old as me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it really, I feel like it really kind of started everything. Basically, I think it started the racing game. Before that, there was like Grand Track 10, which was that top-down, just lights and a little box that you drove around with a steering wheel. You know? Like there were racing games before Pole Position, but Pole Position is pretty much the racing game that looks like all the racing games we play now. That's where it kind of started. And I think, possibly the most important racing game. Certainly hugely influential. Not a lot of fun now.
But that's the thing.
Kind of like a game and watch game.
Yeah, that's kind of that's what influential is not about how well it stands up now, is it?
But yeah, and actually it even had a qualifying lap, like the original Gran Turismo games used to have. You had to do a qualifying thing before you could do the GP.
Am I seeing some cigarette advertising in game as well?
Yes, it did have. It had Pepsi advertising and Marlboro advertising because the 80s.
Yeah, you could just do that stuff.
Terrible. Terrible. How can you do that? That wasn't on the home. Well, obviously, it wasn't on the home console ports, which came later on and probably looked awful.
Yeah, that was Camel.
Yeah,
and Coke. They obviously sold the rights. To, had a different deal in place.
But that is my top 10. I'm not saying it's the top 10, but it's when I kind of look back at the games that I play and the games that I've played. That have been inspired by other games. I feel like this is probably where it's at. Maybe Virtua Racing, bump it down a little bit.
Yeah, let's bump it down slightly.
Happy, But yeah, I think that's it.
Man, there's just so much great kind of racing history there. So yeah, thanks for putting that together. And
my pleasure.
Well, that's good. That's good. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
They gave me this feature and I was kind of like, I don't feel like the right guy.
Yeah.
I don't feel like the right guy for this.
No, racing, not you.
But yeah, so I warmed to it.
Oh, good, good. We might do some more of these then.
Yeah, let's do some more racing content. Let's do some more racing content.
So yeah, stick to IGN and keep an eye out because we're gonna delve into the racing past a little bit more in the next few months. So, bye.
Bye.